Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Miller. I'm a manager of technical services here at Intellius. So I've served as a technical architect on many multi-tenant implementations, very familiar with kind of the underlying technology stack of the landmark applications, things like security, configurations, things of that nature. Today I'll be joined by Deb and Leonard. Deb, do you want to give us a quick introduction?
Oh, Deb, you're on mute.
I did that on purpose, so sorry about that. So my name is Debbie Sherman. I am the Finance Solution Architect here at Intellius. So glad you all could join us today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Leonard Woodall. I'm the Solutions Architect for the Supply Management modules within FSM. Nice to meet everyone.
All right. Thanks, Deb and Leonard. To start off, just want to give a little bit of a background about Intellius. So Intellius is an Infor Alliance partner established in 1999. We offer, numerous consulting services on the technical and functional side. So whether it be cloud migrations or new module implementations, technical, functional support, really, everything across the board within the Infor space. In the expense management application. So just wanted to give a little bit of a background on Intellius. So as we mentioned, today we're going to be talking about the FSM Consolidated Web Applications and what this means for you as an Infor user. So starting off, I want to go ahead and level set, make sure we all have kind of the same understanding of what we're talking about today. When we say web application, what we mean are these web applications here. So, in the screenshot, we just have the web app switcher open. When we talk about a web application, we're talking about these different areas within the application that users navigate to perform their, typical business functions, their kind of dashboard or navigation into the application. The other thing that I want to touch on is what is a consolidated web application? So on the Infor side, they've been consistently rolling out what they're calling the consolidated web applications. These are a replacement of the standard or the unconsolidated web applications within the system. How this has been done is they're consolidating web apps that were typically kind of a one-to-one mapping between a web application and a security role into a shared standard web application per business function or per module. So you'll see references within kind of what we cover today to, the new Payables Consolidated Web Application or the new Global Ledger Consolidated Web Application. With that, these consolidate kind of that user interface that was spread out between, multiple single-use web applications, and bring that all into a standard kind of navigation for users within the system. So this has a much more streamlined user interface, and ultimately, I do think this is kind of a great UI change that Infor has been working on. Especially on the FSM side, the menus within the application have expanded greatly over time. There's very deep layers of submenus, redundancies. It's often challenging to find what you need. And as I mentioned, there were numerous, quote unquote, single-use web applications that had been created. So to kind of improve this, Infor has rolled out the consolidated web applications. These menus and homepages and, the web applications themselves had been, regrouped, recategorized, reorganized to consolidate kind of the navigation for these specific business functions into a single web application. What goes hand in hand with this from a navigation and more so a security and restriction perspective, is UI access controls. So I do want to touch on UI access controls as they, tie in very tightly with these consolidated web applications. So UI access controls are a tool within the Infor landmark application, so not just FSM, but HR talent as well, that provide a simplified kind of point and click kind of setup function to secure navigation within landmark applications. So this is, much easier to put in place to create these policies to restrict navigation compared to how we had to do this in the past. In the past, custom security rules and security roles were needed to grant or restrict access to menu items using LPL. So in the past, it required, coding within the application to restrict access to specific menu items and things of that nature. With UI access control, it is a no code required tool, right? So, anyone who has access to it can, relatively easily pick it up and understand what these, policies mean, what they do, and how that navigation is restricted within the application. The big benefit of this is it's much easier to maintain. And there's much fewer upgrade impacts. So a really cool tool that, like I said, ties in very closely with these consolidated web applications. So to give you kind of a high-level insight into what these look like, I've put a couple of slides together. Within UI access control, which is available under the Security Administration web app, there are numerous pre-configured, Infor delivered policies that are applied to your environment. These policies are assigned to a specific web app and role within the application. And ultimately, what these policies do is control access to the following areas of the application. So kind of the four main ones that are more relevant to what we're talking about today are web applications, menus, menu items, and pages. On top of that, UI access control can be used to control access to the delivered reports within the application. Again, very easy to set up point and click functionality to control, for example, what delivered reports or what web applications or what menus people in a specific security role are able to see. To give you an idea of what this looks like from the actual policy perspective, within our policy, there are multiple components, typically a homepage component and a navigation component. So this is an example of a UI access control policy that controls access to this general area of the administrator homepage. So you can see over here on the left, we have shared processes, which relates to this tab here, general, which is this grouping of items, and then all of the individual navigations available within that grouping. Using UI access control, we're very easily able to go ahead and click on the hidden area to go ahead and hide specific navigations from users within a role. If it's unchecked, that means users within that role are able to access it. On top of that, we can restrict access to menu items, and within menu items, the specific pages that those menu items take you to. So this is for the administrator web app and the application administrator ST role, the navigation component that we're looking at. Over here in the items area, we can see we have financials, which is this menu item. And underneath that are the different navigations available within that page linked to that menu item. So if you ever need to restrict access to, let's say, intercompany billing, right? Maybe that's something that we don't leverage, and we just want to hide it for all of our end users. In the past, you had to go through and create numerous security roles and custom security roles to hide that or perform configurations. Now you're very easily able to leverage UI access control to restrict access to specific navigations within the application. So kind of in all, talking about the consolidated versus standard web applications, the standard web applications provided a consistent user experience by role, right? So kind of the area that I always think about is payables. There's numerous payables roles and numerous payables web applications. Within the consolidated web applications, this provides a consistent user experience by module, right? So that's all rolled up into a specific web application rather than having, 6 different ways within the system to access the same thing. With these consolidated web applications, the UI access control policies are pre-configured by Infor for all of these consolidated web applications. So very closely ties in, that UI access control piece and these consolidated web applications. What I'm going to do now is hand it over to Deb, who's going to walk us through on the finance side, which modules in web apps are impacted.
Thank you so much, Eric. All right, so out of the box, here's our Payables Manager standard web application. So one of the things I think we've all been challenged with in navigating is expanding the menus on the left-hand side, right? And trying to determine, okay, under run processes, where is the functionality that I'm looking for? I think with this consolidated web application, you're really going to like the way it's set up and how those individual tasks are sorted. So Eric, would you please go to the next page? This one is the Payables Invoice Processor, the standard web out-of-the-box application. Again, where we're, utilizing that left-hand menu to try to determine what functionality we want to see. Next slide. Here is the Payables Consolidated Web Application. So this is the menu on the left. Notice that there's not expanders, but instead, if you go to the next page, Eric, these are what comes up. When you click on invoices, you're going to get that specific sub view of it. And here I have administration up in the front that you can see. So here again, we're a payables individual. We may only have access to do setup for vendors, etc. But you can see in here how they're grouping things. So all of our vendor structure, setting up a vendor group, setting up a vendor class, pay groups, etc. The payables company structures and reportable income groups, invoice structures and invoice approval, invoice codes and vendor codes. They're grouped very nicely to allow the user that very fluid experience when they're in and the interface that you're using as you're doing your day-to-day functionality. So I really think this will be great. It is a little bit of a change from what you're used to, but again, I think it's a positive change. So next slide, Eric. So for finance, there are quite a few changes, and I believe I captured them all. But for instance, within assets, your asset manager role and your asset analyst role will now, of course, fall under assets. And Eric did a fantastic job of explaining how you can change access for each one of those individuals based on what they do in their job every day. It affects billing, of course. The billing receivables portal would fairly stay the same. Cash rolls all of the different cash roles, accountant, administrator, the analyst, and the manager into one, as does close for close management. But the financial viewer will stay somewhat similar. So next screen. For global ledger, there's quite a few. All your budget roles, your controller and CFO roles, your financial business analyst, the administrator, processor, and staff account will all roll into global ledger. I really like the new consolidated web app for global ledger. I think it's easy to see. You're not expanding out your finance enterprise group, global ledger, finance enterprise group, maintenance, and then having to select, whether you want to change your finance dimension 1 or your project. It's all there at the click of a button. So I really do like that. Again, match is changing. The match administrator and the specialist roll into one, lease specialist and order entry manager as well. And finally, Eric, last slide. So payables has multiple roles. You just saw the new web application that I showed you. So they all roll up into one. Projects, the same thing. All of the different project roles will roll up. Receivables, reconciliation for recon management, and of course, application administrator now becomes administrator. But one of the things, again, that I like so much about from a financial standpoint is that with the new global ledger consolidated web app, you can really do the same type of functionality you're doing in application administrator from there in a much more fluid process. So I really do like these. And I think that pretty much sums up what they're going to be doing. Many of these were already rolled out. So some of you may have your toggles flipped on to see those. Others will be new to the CU coming in October. So that is it for me, Eric.
Sounds good. I'll hand it over to Leonard to talk through the impacted modules and web apps on the supply chain side.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Deb. So very similar process on the supply management side. Infor has been making a lot of enhancements related to consolidated web apps. So this is a list of all the standard web applications that are available in previous versions and currently available now. So you'll see that the current web applications are things like buyer, contract manager, similar to what Deb was talking about on the finance side. These standard web applications are based upon a role, right? So each one of you would assign a supply management role, buyer, for example, and then the buyer would be trained to go into the buyer standard web application, navigate through the menu options, try to locate where they need to go and so forth. So again, the thing I wanted to point out here is if any of your users are using any of these standard web apps that you see on the screen today, these are the ones that are going to be impacted effective October 2025 because Infor will be disabling all of these standard web applications. Eric, can you go to the next slide? So similar to what Deb mentioned, same kind of scenario on the supply management side. These are the modules or the consolidated modules. So again, we have purchasing, contract, inventory, item lifecycle management, sourcing, and again, administrator, same thing on the supply management side. You'll see application administrator listed under all of the modules. And back to what Deb said, a lot of the administration functions are actually within the purchasing consolidated web app, within the contract, the web app. Now, they did reserve some things that go under administrator, but again, come in, process, workflow, the consolidated web apps are very similar across the board and through all the FSM modules. These are a lot of the similar screenshots that Deb presented, a lot of the same common themes. I wanted to visually show you. So if in your environment, your IT team has enabled all of the consolidated web app features, and I know Eric has a slide deck a little bit further on that displays those. If your IT department enabled all of the consolidated web apps, but has not disabled the standard web apps, for a buyer, this is what they would see today. So again, this is standard and consolidated. So without turning off the standard web apps, if I'm a buyer, notice that when I log in, over here on the left-hand side, I have buyer, contracts, inventory, process server, purchasing, sourcing, and web. Well, purchasing is now the new consolidated web app. And if you notice or remember, I told you buyer is going to go away. So as of October, the user's screen is going to change. This link and standard web app will go away, and it will be purchasing. You can go back one slide for me real quick, Eric. So in October, a buyer will have all of these modules minus the standard web app for buyer. Okay. Next slide, Eric. So again, this is the standard web application for buyer. Very similar to what Deb mentioned. All the menu options are down on the left-hand side. You have to expand menu options to locate, the action or the list or the report that you're looking for. Okay, next slide. So again, this is the consolidated web app for purchasing, very much like the purchasing on the payable side. All of my links over here on the left-hand side, purchasing, receiving, events, utilities, and other modules, these are all links, again, related to a buyer. Access is controlled by UI access control. Anything that's available within each one of these links is specifically tailored to the buyer based upon the UI access control policy files that Eric mentioned earlier. Okay, next slide. And again, when I click on purchasing, again, it's going to provide me with a user interface with tabs and links to all of the menu options that are pertinent to a buyer within the purchasing module. Same thing for receiving, events, utilities, and other modules. So what this means is instead of the buyer having to navigate to other standard roles based or standard web apps based upon role, what Infor is trying to do is based upon the role assignment of buyer, they go to purchasing and their links, their menu options, everything available to them is controlled by UI access control and is based upon them being assigned the buyer role.
All right.
That's all I have.
Yeah. Thanks for walking us through that, Deb and Leonard, to see kind of what specific modules and web apps are impacted by this update. From a high-level overview, why are we talking about this now? The big reason is if you're familiar with the feature toggles within the FSM application, if you go ahead and look over here, we can see that the trial period for enabling the consolidated web apps and hiding the unconsolidated web apps is set to end in October 2025. So what this means for you is that, if no action is taken, on October 20th would be the Monday after the October CU is applied. Users are going to log into the system and be presented with a completely new UI, right? Because of that, that can impact your business operations. Users may not know where to navigate within the system. They may not, be familiar with that UI. So getting ahead of this and, understanding that this trial period will be ending in October 2025 is very important, as action needs to be taken by your organization to get ahead of this and make sure you're all set and ready for that trial period ending. So what are some considerations of enabling these consolidated web apps? Why is this important? The biggest thing is security. If you're an organization that has custom security roles, there are not going to be any pre-delivered UI access control policies for that custom security role to access any web application. Because of that, we need to go ahead and set up those policies, review your custom security role setup. For example, if you have custom security roles that have rules in there to hide menu items or grant menu items, that will need to be refactored to leverage UI access control to secure those specific web apps and menu items. On top of this, from a configuration perspective, if you have put in UI configurations on the menus or home pages within those unconsolidated web applications, those will need to be refactored to the new web apps and the new home pages and menus associated with those. Behind the scenes, the physical menu and the physical homepage that is referenced is different from those unconsolidated web applications. So as a client, you will need to identify which of these are configured. We want to, possibly make this configuration on the new UI. And that will need to be done, again, prior to that October 2025 trial period end. The biggest area I would say that needs to be considered is navigation, right? As we've seen, the navigation within the system will be changing. While it is more intuitive, right? And there are lots of benefits to that navigation changing, it still is changing, right? So users are going to need to follow new navigations to perform their typical business functions. So getting ahead of that, putting together training materials, informing the end users and letting them know that this is coming is very important to ensure that you are not gratefully impacted by the ending of this trial period. The final thing to call out from a navigation perspective is if you leverage workspaces and you have delivered or custom widgets within your workspaces within Infor OS, those should be reviewed and tested to ensure that they still function properly in the way that you expect with these feature toggles enabled and with your UI access control policies set up. So while we have talked about everything that's changing, the final thing I want to talk about is the benefits of this, right? This is a much more streamlined user interface. I think the biggest win from a user experience perspective is eliminating those nested menu items on the left-hand navigation pane. I know within especially the application administration web app, there are almost 6 or 7 levels to get to, where you want to go within the application. With that, some of these menu item names are even cut off, right? So it was kind of a point and click and guess, right? That you're clicking on the right menu item when you can't read the full name. So with this new UI change, with these new consolidated web apps, the user interface should be a lot more intuitive and better for those users. There's a much better use of screen real estate. There's no more than 7 to 10 top level menu items. So top level menu items being the area, the initial menus that appear on the left when you open a web application, and just a much more logical grouping of menu items into pages. From an end user perspective, from someone leveraging the finance application or the supply management application, this should help make your business process more efficient, right? In the past, you may have had to switch between, 3 different web applications to kind of follow that business process within FSM. With this, refactoring and consolidation of these web apps, the hope is that, okay, now I can stay in one specific web application to do, 75% of my typical job duties. Now, if you need to go, look at something in payables and global in GL, right? Yes, those are, completely different modules and you'll have different web applications. But from a, working in a specific module perspective, the user interface should be much more streamlined. The final thing I want to talk about here is phase 4. So we saw that phases 1 through 3 and the hiding of the unconsolidated web applications the trial period is ending in October of 2025. Phase 4 of these consolidated web apps on the FSM application is being released on October of 2025. The trial period for that will end in April of 2026. So you do have a bit of time to get your ducks in a row and, be prepared for that additional trial period ending. But ultimately, again, even after October 2025, there are actions that will need to be taken if you leverage any of these web applications or want to leverage any of the new ones. So the 4 web applications that are being consolidated with this phase 4 release is requisitions. As of right now, there's not a core unified requisitions web app, so one will be coming. And Financials Administrator, Financials Processor, and Supply Management Processor do all exist today, but will be refactored and consolidated with this Phase 4 release. So with that, I wanted to go ahead and open it up for questions and see what kind of questions people have.
We have a few. The first one is, do you recommend to turn on consolidated web apps and also hide the old ones at the same time?
I think, from a implementation perspective, if I was an organization right now, what I would do is go into a non-prod environment and just enable the Phase 1 through 3 consolidated web applications and see what they look like, right? And compare them to the unconsolidated ones to identify what those changes are, right? What UI access control policies do I need to put in place? What configurations do I need to put in place? Kind of do that, review and analysis of those current state web applications versus the future state or the consolidated web applications, and kind of, get all of that set up. Once you are in that place, I would go ahead and hide the unconsolidated web applications, but that can be beneficial to be able to see within the application in review prior to, getting to that October 2025 date.
Eric, someone did share in the chat that during the Insights call yesterday, Infor announced that the consolidated web app requirements are being extended to April 2026 now. It's in the chat if you'd like to see it.
Got it. Good to know.
Yes.
Great timing.
Yes, perfect.
Eric,
right?
I just want to point out too that we have clients that we have hidden the standard workspaces and are going live ahead of, at the same time. But yes, we do have clients that have hidden the standard web applications and using the consolidated web app. And the only other thing I wanted to mention was those of you that are on maybe on the tech side or are building these or are responsible for building out these UI access control, they are exportable, and we can export and import them through ISD from one tenant to another. So you don't have to rebuild them in each tenant.
There's been a lot of chatter in the chat here about this, but I also think I know for our folks that attended the conference here just recently with Infor, there were a lot of clients that weren't aware this was coming. So that may have impacted, why Infor decided to push it out as well. But I think everyone has so far agreed that it's better to start early, and we would absolutely agree with that. It's something you need to start taking action on now and not waiting or extending simply because Infor has extended it. They are a very valuable tool and, can be very valuable to you as an organization. But sorry, Eric, there are some other questions. I'll let Chandra finish up.
Yeah. What I wanted to do, I saw a question in the chat of where is a crosswalk of old and new to reference. I just threw the link to a KB that contains that mapping within the chat. That KB on the Infor support site has a good number of Excel files in the attachment section that provides that mapping. So it can be a very useful resource as you go through this process.
All right. Oops. And we do have some other questions in the Q&A part versus the chat. So let's go through the Q&A and then bounce back to the chat because there's a lot, like Deb said, a lot of back and forth in there. So
Yeah.
In the Q&A, we've got, are UI access controls administered on a user basis? Could you demonstrate where you navigate to administer the UI access controls?
Yeah, absolutely. So UI access controls are administered on a role basis rather than a specific user by user basis. So a grouping of users, anyone assigned a specific role, will have the same policies applied to them as long as they have that same listing of roles. This is available under Security Administration, UI access control within the system. One thing I like to call out that is, from my end, it excites me, in my nerdy self, is the review changes area. So in the past, there was no way to identify if like the underlying delivered policy changed. With the review changes functionality, each CU or each feature release, you can come in and review, okay, these are the delivered policies that were changed by Infor. Once I've reviewed them, we've taken on whatever updates, and we're happy with it, we can mark it as reviewed. And then it will say, okay, it was last reviewed on 7/10, all delivered changes have been reviewed. So one of those kind of helpful tools from the Infor side.
And one thing, just to add to that, Eric, one thing I do like about this is when you do the comparison, if let's say 2 new menu options were added by Infor, in the changes review, it lays it out fairly simply that these 2 menu options have been added, and then you would have to take the action to incorporate that into your UI access control policies if you modified them.
All right, great. Another question, are security classes still going to be used?
Yes, security classes will still be leveraged to control underlying business class and action, authorization within the system. Can I view this data? Can I perform this action? Will be controlled still via security classes. UI access control is purely for the UI, right? So controlling what navigations users are able to see within the application. But those will tie in with this, underlying security classes associated with each role.
Okay. Will the new consolidated approach alter new user setup, for example, employer, actor, context, agent components?
No, it will not. It will still follow the same, format of assigning roles to users, and the roles will kind of feed into UI access control to, restrict or grant access to navigations within the system.
Okay, and you may have kind of addressed this next one. What happens if we have custom security groups?
So those custom security groups, assuming you mean a specific role, like we've built out client-specific security roles for other organizations, I think this is a good opportunity to dig in and review those, right? I have seen at numerous other clients, they leverage basically the delivered role, but had to customize it because they were using menu hide functionality within the security classes. So restricting access to specific menu items. If that's the only custom part of your role, you can then, roll back to the delivered role and leverage UI access control, or kind of go down a different path. From a underlying security class perspective, you may still need custom security roles to restrict access to a specific business class or action. But definitely a good time to review and reevaluate and see where you can, leverage more of those Infor delivered security roles.
All right, and this one is asking about the impact of a system that is highly configured on forms and menus.
Yeah, so that is where this will be a bit more impactful, right? If on the FSM side, you spend a lot of time configuring the menus, pages, kind of more so the navigational pieces of the application, that will, like I mentioned, need to be refactored to the new associated, the mapped consolidated web application. The underlying menu will change. So you may have configured the payables or the payables processor menu. Well, we would want to merge that configuration into the new payables consolidated web application menu. to ensure that you're still able to perform, whichever business functions are needed within that role.
All right. So we created a custom financial viewer to limit viewing some processes. Do we need to rebuild that?
It depends. If it's a custom financials viewer, well, I guess you couldn't really create a custom web application. Yeah, I think you would want to review that and still maybe have a, custom financials viewer role within the system that has a different UI access control policy than the delivered financials viewer ST role. So that would be, a good opportunity to review and kind of refactor where you're performing those menu hide functionalities, controlling what users can see from, LPL security class based restrictions to the UI access control restrictions.
Okay, in GHR, Infor broke down the consolidated web app toggles into modules versus FSM. All modules toggle is combined in 3 toggle. Any idea if this will change so we can target one team at a time?
I don't believe that is changing. Within the FSM application, come in here to administrator. I think it will still be, phase 1, 2, 3 within the application. No way to, manually enable for a specific module.
In FSM Finance, can you confirm that the Consolidated Web Apps Phase 4 will not show up on the toggles page until the 2025.10 CU drop?
That's correct. That won't be available here until October of 2025.
Okay, and then like Deb mentioned, there is a lot of information coming in from what people are hearing on the office hours as far as timeline goes. So, we're hearing in real time with you guys. We can confirm that when we send out our replay link, as well as go through any of the questions that, just kind of confirm responses. I think there's some really great feedback from some of you folks on the call, just within the chat, and we'll review, confirm any responses that you've got, make sure we've answered any questions that we've missed. And the last question was, how can we get a copy of this presentation? So that is exactly it. We're going to send out a replay link. We will send out the slide deck. And like I said, we will kind of go through these questions, confirm we answered them, maybe reiterate the answer that we provided with any links, whatever else, and send that out in the next day or so for you. We did have another one come in here. So it says, we rolled out each app like receivables, payables, etc., using the security UI. It made it easier for us to respond to issues by doing it month by month. So I think that was a good.
Yeah. So using the UI access controls, you can go ahead and, not enable the new version and keep the old version enabled. But in terms of kind of breaking out the feature toggle, you have to enable all of them at once. And then within UI access control, you can disable, for example, if we enabled phase 1, we could disable everything but assets, roll out assets at a single time, and then move on to projects. So there are some ways around that to rolling it out on a, module by module basis. But at a high level, the feature toggle, does group them together, and I don't believe that will change.
I think that we have covered all the questions. double checking both the chat and the QA. But I think we've covered everything that's come in. And like I said, we will confirm and, you know, just reiterate any responses that you've got either from us or from other folks in the chat. So anything else before we wrap up here? Any other questions? Okay. All right. Thank you all for your participation. That was great to have that interaction. What about training? So
Intellius could, you know, happily provide training. I do know that Infor has been holding the Consolidated Web Application office hours, so that may be a good place to start. I think you have to go to the Innovation Insights Master KB to get the invite for that. I didn't see it automatically put on my calendar, but that's a great resource for you that Infor is providing on, you know, training in relation to what these consolidated web apps are, where you can get your questions answered, things like that. Another great area, as always, is docs.infor.com. Taking a peek around there and seeing, you know, what documentation is there. And then after that, if you still have questions, you can go ahead and reach out to Intellius. Kathy, I don't have the link to either of those available on hand, but I can go ahead and send them in the chat right after this and get that over to you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Deb, Eric, and Leonard, and thank you everybody for joining today. We'll have the follow-up information out to you shortly.